Sorry about that. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel's weekly forum. We should be live on all platforms now. I see we're on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And if we're not on LinkedIn, we're setting that up right now. We're on Clubhouse as well. So if you know someone who wants to join and is driving or something like that, text them and let them know to join us on Clubhouse, and we can send you that link if you need us to. We're just waiting for our founder, Dumasani Washington, to join us. But in the meantime, I would like to remind you all and encourage you all to continue to visit our website, ibsi.org. That's ibsi.org. And let me put up here on the screen as well. There you go. To stay up to date on all of our events coming up, such as this weekly forum, as well as other Zoom events and in person events as well. See if we are coming to a location near you. And I would also like to encourage you to continue to, if you already are, to donate. There's a QR code up there, and it'll be up there throughout the session today, the forum today. I believe it is $10 a month to be a legacy builder, just as little as $10 a month. That's all it takes. So like I said, we would like to encourage you to continue to donate and join our mailing list that you'll see at ibsi.org. I believe our founder is in the house.
Apologies, everyone. Thank you so much, Maria, for filling
No
in for
problem.
me. The camera was not on. And so let me just go ahead and let you know. So this is not, yes, we know we do this each week. So I teach a class. It's a part of a Bible Institute, training institute on Monday for a few weeks. That's East Coast 7 to right at 8. And I have like a small window to transition from that class to the forum here, and I thought I had everything set up already, but I started clicking on stuff and it wasn't there. So my apologies, everyone. Again, welcome to the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, Forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. Thank Maria so much, our producer, for letting you know what was going on. So great to be with all of you here today. We have so much to get into, but again, this is our weekly forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America, and which we unpack all the topics related to those types of things, whether we're talking about Israel, the Middle East, Africa, the African diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, what's going on in America, all of those things. And we may even be sharing you about different events that we had a couple of weeks ago. We were in Atlanta and we did our Africa and Black America's prophetic call to Zion down there in Atlanta, Georgia, with Pastor Matrilla Hall. And so that was about 2 weeks ago. And we'll be doing the event like that as well in the Milwaukee area in the spring, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. So we'll be letting you know about that as well. So again, welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you. I will be joined by one of our other staff members who's going to be a co-host with me today, Miss Olga Mashwe Washington, as we unpack a couple of different Africa, Israel related issues here on today. And I'm going to start here right now, kind of picking up where we left off on last week by mentioning to you an article. So one of our latest Africa Israel Weekly, you go to ibsi.org. And if you're watching this and you're seeing this stream, or even after it's recorded, they're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, share there, and you'll see different clips from some of the other forums that we've had over this past year in particular, since we started our new format. And so I just wanted to make you mindful of that. Last week, we ended the discussion kind of alluding to something that became an article, and you can put the link of the article which was entitled Avoiding Israel's Civil War. Now, I'm starting right there because we're going to go from there to some South Africa, Israel things, some very, very interesting developments that have taken place here over the past couple of weeks, right? It's been very, very interesting what's happening. So in some sort of order and format here, I want to mention to you about this article on our Africa Israel Weekly is our Substack, in which we write different articles. Every once in a while, we'll share a link to a video that we may have done. And one of the things that we addressed in this article, entitled again, Avoiding Israel's Civil War. I wrote this. I don't write them all, but I wrote this one, and we were talking about the issue of judicial reform in Israel. You can go ahead and put it on there, Maria. That's the link. You'll see the cover to it there. And the link there is in the chat as well. And so for those of you, if you're on Instagram, you will see that it is posted on there. We've a couple of quotes. Though you can also find the article on our Twitter page, on our Facebook page, and The point of the article was kind of underscoring, um, navigating, if you will, through what is an intense time. So, for those of you, whether you're Israeli or Jewish or not, or you may be aware of the fact that since the election, the last Israeli election, which I believe was October of last year, when the Likud party, led by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they won a majority of the seats, and they have been, among other things, been implementing what they call judicial reform. They've been wanting to reform the way that the Supreme Court operates in Israel. It's a very generic way of describing it. I'm not even commenting on the actual reform itself. Just saying that the actual the reform, the idea of it, and what's being implemented, has caused great debate in Israel and in the Jewish community here in the United States. IBSI has not said anything about, because as I said in the article, and I encourage you to go ahead and you can either go to our website, ibsi.org, and scroll down, and you'll see Africa Israel Weekly as a link. You can click on that, and that is the very next. They're listed in order there in terms of date. You can check it out there, or you can go to ibsi.substack.com, and that's another way you can go directly to it as well. And I want to encourage you to read it, because I'm not going to read it here and go into the whole thing, right? I want you to share, and feel free to comment on it if you want to share it. Whatever you want to do, like ask questions or whatever, we'll try to get to that as quickly as we can, because we do very much appreciate your feedback. What we are saying in the article is that though IBSI has a standing policy, whatever is internal Israeli politics, Israeli dealings, that's not our comment. That's not our area, right? Solidarity with Israel, Africa, Jewish people, Black America, the whole thing, right? Our focus, as far as Israel is a sovereign nation, and it makes decisions and policies and has to do what it needs to do as a sovereign nation, right? Like in the spirit of Dr. King, Israel has the right to exist and defend itself, right? So when it comes to what the Israeli Parliament, Knesset, what the lower circuit courts, the Supreme Court, all that's not our focus, right? We say the Israelis alone are the ones who get to comment on and debate or whatever, not to mention the fact, particularly when it comes to criticizing, one of the reasons, and this has been since IBSI has existed since 2013, one of the reasons we are not publicly or vocally critical about decisions the Israeli government makes or doesn't make in virtually any instance, when I'm talking about internal Israeli politics, is because there is so much criticism, even undue criticism of Israel as a nation, that IBSI is not going to be a part of that clamoring chorus, right? We're not going to give talking points to the endless list of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic venues out there to bash Israel, right? Now, there have been at times some who've asked us to weigh in on things, right? Sometimes those things have to do with ethnicity, right? The Ethiopian Israeli community, the Igbo, who live many in the Tel Aviv area, the Black Hebrew Israelites who are based in Dimona, and some of the controversy that has happened there, which I'm not even naming them because that's not the focus here. And there have been times we've been asked to say something, but because what we were being asked to weigh in on had to do with internal Israeli affairs, we were silent on it, right? That is our general, and it's not just with Israel, right? When it comes to other nations, what we tend to do as an organization, we've talked about this as a staff for a long time, when it's things like, if we criticize, as we have, the former administration, for example, in Nigeria, was under Muhammadu Buhari, was the president for, I believe, a couple of terms. I'm not sure, maybe it was just one. And there was much of the Christian genocide happening there seemed to be happening, and the government was doing very little to stop it. We were concerned, and we actually spoke out about that because we had been speaking out about that type of thing for years, right? And even then, we were trying to, investigate and check it out, everything. Very rarely do we cross the line in terms of a government in that sense. And the same thing is particularly true with Israel. Having said all of that, and we still didn't do it even in this article, we're not talking about the judicial reform itself. We actually quoted from Alan Dershowitz's article that he wrote shortly before Bibi Netanyahu's visit to Israel, in which Dershowitz was criticizing reform and conservative rabbis who had decided to protest Benjamin Netanyahu at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And as I mentioned in the article, not only did that happen, but there, according to the Times of Israel, some 2,000, I believe, American Jews and Israelis actually there gathered in front of the United Nations protesting Netanyahu. So we wrote an article about that because our mindset, if you will, was that what is an internal family fight, judicial reform in Israel, has spilled over to the degree that now you have Israelis and American Jews, right? Not that you can be both, right? 2,000 deep in front of the United Nations building protesting Bibi, and Israel's enemies are not going to see it like that. They're going to see Israel being protested in front of the United Nations. This is the point that Alan Dershowitz was making. IBSI was agreeing with that and going further, right? Just like when IBSI defends Israel against false apartheid claims, whether those claims are coming from outside or inside Israel, right? There's that B'Tselem, I believe, is the human rights organization that's in Israel that is condemned it as an apartheid state. A former Mossad uh, leader, chief, I mean, not chief, but former Mossad agent about a couple weeks ago, they came out and made a public statement. Israel's an apartheid state. So our goal is not to get into some sort of war of words with Israelis and Jews about Israel. At the same time, we are not going to ignore the false claims of Israeli apartheid when it's still untrue. So the unfortunate thing there that we were mentioning in the book, in the article about avoiding the Israel civil war, the whole point was that in our avoiding making any type of commentary about judicial reform, how Israelis protest their government, I mean, that we're not even trying to. What we were actually addressing was something that what we felt was just very unfortunate. Now those protests in front of the United Nations in New York, the United Nations that not only demonizes Israel 24/7, has been doing this for years, right? But has more African blood on its hands than we could even, while the genocides and while the mutilation and while all those things that are happening in places like Libya, the slavery of millions, this same United Nations barely has anything to say. And the part of the point that Alan Dershowitz was making was that, okay, here is a international human rights body that just demonizes Israel as apartheid, calls Israel committing genocide. And he said, and the sight of rabbis there in front of the United Nations protesting Netanyahu, but it's not seen like that beyond the Jewish community. It's going to be seen. So if I'm BDS, if I'm Students for Justice in Palestine, if I'm CARE, I'm loving that, right? And not to mention the fact that when it comes particularly to the continent of Africa, and in certain places in particular, I should say, areas in Africa, the United Nations has been, do you know, it's realized that the last earthquake in Haiti, I believe it was the last one because there's been several over the last since 2012 and now. Last one, it was reported widely that the United Nations peacekeepers ran a prostitution ring of countless young people in Haiti. To my knowledge, no one has still been prosecuted for that. To my knowledge, and I may be wrong, we've been following the story for a little while. No one's still. So the United Nations, for all the other good things that it kind of does, when it comes to the African diaspora, so the point that was being made in that article wasn't trying to attack those rabbis, wasn't trying to attack the Israelis or the Jewish Americans that were American Jews that were actually protesting. We were pointing out how that is it is a quagmire for a group like IBSI that has condemned how the United Nations treats both Africa and Israel and beyond, how it demonizes Israel, how it ignores what's going on with Africa. And one of the comments that Dershowitz made, he said, but where are those rabbis when just the other day when Mahmoud Abbas, who's sitting there and too, was calling, basically lying about the Holocaust? The Jews were being killed because they were money lenders, not because they're let her come on in, bring her in, not because they're Jews, right? The whole Holocaust denial, right? So that's where that article came from. Now, again, I want you to please check out that article. That was our heart in the article, and we chose that because last thing, and I'll say this last thing, and our co-host is joining, not co-host, but one of our leaders of IBC, Miss Olga Mashwe Washington. Hello, Miss Olga.
Hello, sir. Good evening, everybody.
What better time to have a South African come on in here? And we definitely talked about everything we were saying. What was I saying in the part? Olga was saying that in that actual, we wrote the article, we discussed, we're talking about the whole avoiding Israel's civil war. Mm-hmm. There was something else that we're saying that we were, I'm losing my train of thought. We talked about the Dershowitz thing, and we went further than that as well. When we were talking about how the fight being taken outside into basically the local park as a metaphor, right? And the protesting of Netanyahu. I think Dershowitz was saying that if you can do it at his hotel, you want to go to whatever, right? This wasn't, our article wasn't even a defense of Benjamin Netanyahu or about the judicial, nothing. We have no comment on that whatsoever. Ours was particularly in the arena of the United Nations that has notoriously just, again, the demonization of Israel, everyone, has consistently meant the loss of so many African lives, right? Why? Because while the United Nations Human Rights Council and the Perpetual Council of Israel, inquiry against Israel, all of these things are happening while they ignore the slaves in Libya, Mauritania, and all these types of things. We're saying how disappointing it was that there's now this protest against Israel. And for those who are against Israel, Bibi, to you, it may have been against Bibi. I'm telling you, outside of the bubble that would be the Israeli judicial reform, was a protest against Israel. We've been watching it play out. And that's the last thing I said, that bell will not be unrung, right? The types of demonization that's coming towards Israel, right? That's coming from other Israelis and American Jews. While they're saying, well, it's not Israel, it's about Bibi. People kind of push back on it, and I'm willing to have the debate and the discussion. I'm going, yes, we know what you mean. We're telling you how it's actually playing out. And that was the point that we were making there in that article, that we were sharing that information. And so, Olga, how are you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing well. Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. The one that kind of started there because we have so much to get into on today. So it's good that you'll be able to be with us. Olga, who was voted among the top 25, number one of the top 25 visionaries, as visionaries with the ZION, by the JNF, and it was published in the Jerusalem Post a couple of weeks ago. As a matter of fact, Olga, in a few days, will be headed to Jerusalem. I believe it's in Jerusalem. She'll be there for. It's in Tel Aviv. I'm sorry, in Tel Aviv. The award ceremony for that particular. So first and foremost, again, we want to congratulate Olga, who's not only a board member of IBC and not only over our Speakers Bureau, but also the COO of Club Z for Teens. She wears so many hats, not to mention as a wife and a mother and leader in so many different areas, as well as the CEO of Daisy, which is Defend, Embrace. Embrace. Oh, yeah, I'm doing it, Olga. Invest in and support Israel. Yep, did it right there. Which is another Israel supporting Africa-Israel organization based in South Africa that her father started the same year as IBSI. So Olga's was a very busy woman. So Olga, congratulations again, ma'am.
Well, thank you, sir. And it's no secret, but I do need to make it publicly known that it wouldn't have been possible without the tribe that I'm privileged to be a part of on the Mishra side and also the Washington side. So I'm very honored and grateful and looking forward to what the future holds.
Absolutely, ma'am. So no, again, we're excited for you. I'm checking on here, I'm making sure that I have this thing on my Clubhouse thing. So Olga, someone please help me. Okay. I said some different things that are popping up on there. So Olga, there are several different things that have happened over the last week or two where Israelis, Africans, particularly South Africa, there's this central thing, the former defense minister, the head of the Anglican Church and stuff. And I know we need to unpack that a little bit. So I'm going to follow you. I don't know where you want to start. There's been the apartheid claims by South Africans, which again, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm talking about the false apartheid libel against Israel from within Israel, right? And we're battling it. We have to battle it, right? Because it's just not true. Not only not true where Israel's concerned, is a complete disrespect to the people who actually experienced apartheid in South Africa. But Olga, there's that, and there's also one of the other political parties. They went to Israel and everything. So let me know where you want to start.
Maybe with regards to how I feel about it, it's almost like the game of, I think it's whack-a-mole or whack-a-mole, one of those when you gotta like whack it all the time. So this apartheid libel keeps popping up and then it disappears for a while and popping up and disappears for a while. And I think the first thing that everyone needs to remember is that it is one of the anti-Semitic tools. And we're very bold about calling it an anti-Semitic tool that Israel haters use in order to not just demonize Israel, but to come for the Jewish people. Because the end product or the end goal of this is not just the dismantling of a political system that is quote unquote oppressing non-Jews, like the apartheid system was in South Africa. It was about the dismantling of the system that was there as it pertained to Black people. This is about legitimately or rather calling the existence of the only Jewish state in the world an illegitimate existence. And so if something's illegitimate, then it has to be dismantled and it shouldn't exist anymore. And if you're going to do away with the state of Israel, they're not just going to be satisfied with that, then it's do away with the Jewish people as well. So this is ultimately about the destruction and the annihilation of the Jewish people. And so what we've seen, particularly in the last week, but we'll also do some reflection over the last several weeks, is that in South Africa, we had two extremes. One was a very prominent man. As you mentioned, I think it's a defense minister or former defense minister of South Africa. He used to be a freedom fighter during apartheid. He was a very significant member of the African National Congress. For those that may not be familiar with South Africa's politics, it is the current ruling party in South Africa. He was a very prominent member there before he broke away and formed his own political party called COPE. His name is Mosiuoa Lekota, and he remains the president of COPE, which is one of the opposition parties in South Africa. And he, for the longest, has, together with various other prominent politicians as well as businessmen. And in fact, we have IPSI did a video on the different leaders in South Africa that speak about or speak against rather the claim of Israel being an apartheid state. So he came up and he said, no, Israel's not an apartheid state. And these are the reasons why it's not. Fast forward a few days later, and we then had the Anglican Church in the southern parts of Africa come out and put out the statement saying that they, as a church in Southern Africa, were concerned because Israel is an apartheid state. It's a very interesting article that's there, and we can unpack it a little bit, Pastor Dumisani. So it's, on the one aspect, you've got these Black leaders saying Israel's not an apartheid state. And then on the other hand, you've got these Black leaders that are saying Israel is an apartheid state. And I'm sure that many people are confused saying, all right, South Africa, what is it? Is it or is it not? And that's something that people need to understand is the tension that's happening once again.
So Olga and Maria, if you have that article on there, and I was looking for it on here. And thank you. Shout out to Elizabeth. No, thank you, ma'am. One of our IPSI ambassadors was letting me know that my microphone was off on Clubhouse. So my apologies, everyone. Again, I require so much help that my staff, I know I drive them crazy. My apologies there. I want to, if we don't have the link that's there, I'm going to put it here and yes, it's it on there. So Maria, if you can show just a glimpse of that. One of the articles that Olga was starting with and referring to the former defense minister of South Africa, that is the gentleman there. Olga, could you say his name again, please, ma'am?
Mosiuoa Lekota.
Mosiuoa. It's funny. It's pronounced like Masiwa, like the other Masiwa from Zimbabwe, but it's just spelled differently. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So yes, the interview, and there's also a link for there's the interview that Olga's referring to. The name of his political party is an acronym for COPE, I believe. Mm-hmm. And yes, I was able to see that interview on there, and he in that interview, among other things, and our friend who interviewed him, say his name again, please, Olga. I know I met him before.
Bafana Modise.
Bafana, yes, sir.
Yes, Bafana, and he's the spokesperson for the South African Friends of Israel.
Shout
Totally.
out to Bafana. I mean, you did a great job, sir. If I realize I don't have his WhatsApp. I have class, but I got one of the shout out tell me you did a great job. It was a great interview. But in the midst of the interview, and they talked about a lot of different things. They kind of dug in, and at some point, every once in a while, he would return to the Israel theme or the Israel topic, if you will. And again, just like it talked about in the Jerusalem Post article, this former defense minister of South Africa fought in the apartheid struggle, very well respected political leader in South Africa, pushed back, or I should say, debunked the whole idea of Israel as an apartheid state. Right? Why? And again, and Maria, get the thing queued up because we might. I'm thinking I told you I'm gonna do by feel here. And I'll refer to it. Don't put up Maria, but there is a video. If you go on ibsi.org, ibsi.org again. This is our weekly forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. Every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you go on ibsi.org and you scroll down to videos, you can also see it on our YouTube page as well. You'll see one that's entitled, and you'll see Olga's lovely picture there, and it says Black South African Voices for Israel. Right. And I thought we might show it, but I want to make sure we're going to have enough time because the time goes by so quick. I want you to hear more from Olga here live than on the video. The video watch a little bit later on your own. And I encourage you to do it and share it as well, right? Because on that video, Olga unpacks the fact that Black South Africans, like any other people, are not a monolith. They are not, everybody doesn't think the same, do the same. They're people. People are diverse within ethnic groups, within religions. Every Christian is not the same. Every Jewish person is not the same. So Olga talks about the fact that, yes, there have been prominent South Africans that have condemned Israel as an apartheid state, including people like the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, right? And others, right? At the same time, there are other equally prominent Black South Africans who have not only pushed back against that, but have actually defended Israel or actually defended the Israel-South Africa relationship, right? While not turning a blind eye to the Palestinian plight, right? But they are ones who looked at it and they see it differently. One of the reason they see it differently is they don't see Israel as the oppressor of the Palestinian people. They actually, Nelson Mandela himself, for those young folks out there, Nelson Mandela said Israel's apartheid state. He never condemned Israel's apartheid state. He was critical of things that he didn't feel were fair where the Palestinians were concerned, and he stood in alliance with Yasser Arafat and the PLO. That's true. He actually, they were friends, right? But he never condemned Israel as an apartheid state. He never condemned Israel's right to defend itself. He even said that he couldn't conceive of Israel withdrawing from the territories unless there were secure borders. Go ahead.
It's also important to note that former President Nelson Mandela visited Israel itself. So here you have the BDS going, don't go to Israel, you need to boycott Israel, and how dare you show solidarity by visiting Israel. Not only did he go, but in his visit, and it was in 1999, in his visit in Israel, he comments on the fact that there had been an outcry by some people who said, like, how can you go to Israel? It's an apartheid state. You need to boycott it. And he was like, no, wait a minute. There are countries that oppressed South Africans, that oppressed Africans. And we as South Africans, we as Africans have been told, forgive them. Slavery, various forms of oppression, forgive them. Right? Many countries in the West, America including one of them, various European countries, forgive. But Israel, these are his words, and I think it's available on either Ipsy's Facebook page, because we did share something about it, a link on it. I actually think it's our Instagram. We shared a clip of that particular visit to Israel where he articulates this. And he says that Israel did not participate in any atrocities that directly impacted South Africans. Did not have a hand in it. Now, some people, and that's a conversation for another day, will highlight the fact that Israel did support the apartheid government through arms. Yes, they did, as did many other countries of the world. So the hypocrisy is incredible. But it's important to know that Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela, set foot in Israel, loved the Jewish people as well. And so how his name has been hijacked to perpetuate this lie needs to continuously be called out.
When our IPSI ambassadors had the privilege and the honor of traveling to South Africa back last December, goodness, it's almost a year now, August. Time goes by so fast, right? We were in Israel, of course, this past June, but last December we were in South Africa. Of course, we also had the honor to go to Cape Town, and we visited the Jewish Museum, I believe is what it's called. And among other things, we saw film footage of Nelson Mandela, among other things, praising the Jewish community, thanking them
Mhm.
for their help in the apartheid struggle, the struggle against apartheid. He said the Jewish people were very much represented in this struggle against apartheid. So again, as Olga is saying, not only and not anti-Israel, but for Israel's defense, but at the same time, not an anti-Semite whatsoever. Of course, revisionist historians and people with an agenda have tried to put those words in the late Nelson Mandela's mouth, but none of that is true, right? And what the video actually does is it said the video that Olga featured in our MC video, it actually goes through the list of other prominent South Africans who and what they've said about Israel and their relationship with Israel. The other video that Olga's referring to, yes, it is on our Instagram. And I know we didn't put it on our YouTube, but if those of you are interested in it, you can check it out on Instagram. Maria, if you're able to pull up, that's fine. We did it months and months ago, but some of you may have seen it. I believe the original footage was shot by AP News there, and it was as Nelson Mandela is emerging from the synagogue that's there right outside of Cape Town, and he makes a statement. He had gone in there. It was a Shabbat, so he'd gone on there, and they had Shabbat service, and of course the cameras weren't allowed inside, of course, and he comes outside. And he again makes another. This is a separate statement that I'm referring to that we saw at the museum. Nelson Mandela would repeatedly tell the world the Jewish people were very instrumental in the fight against apartheid and the building of our nation. He even talked about that as well, how they have helped build this nation. This is Nelson Mandela, the person they try to say condemned Israel and condemned the Jewish people. So, yes.
So I wonder if people are confused. Again, you have one black leader saying this Israel is an apartheid state and another black leader saying the exact opposite. And I would encourage anybody to study, to read, to understand, to educate yourself. And IPSI's got a great amount of resources, be it on our YouTube link, our YouTube page, or even on our website. But the bottom line is, and as I was reading the article, particularly around the Anglican Church, a scripture came to mind, especially because we're talking about the church, right? Is 2 Timothy 2:15, where the writer, who was Paul, was saying to Timothy, study to show yourself approved. Study to show yourself approved, a worker that does not need to be ashamed, rightly being able to divide the word and being able to showcase what is right and what is wrong. And I'm going to paraphrase it for today's lingo is study so that you don't need to be embarrassed, study so that you know what is true, study so that when you hear information, you're able to dissect it. And there's 4 parts, Pastor Dumiseni, with your permission, that I would actually like to highlight with regards to the ignorance of the Anglican Church, respectfully, in how they perpetuate and can pass this resolution in relation to Israel. So the first thing that they argued was that they had to take this stance, it's a principal stance, number one, because the Christian numbers are rapidly declining in Israel. And those of us who know the truth know that that's not accurate. You
Right.
can look at organizations, nonprofit organizations that look at the freedom rates of organizations in the Middle East and across Africa. And it is known statistically that in Israel, the Christian population is on the increase. That not only the Christian population, but any person of a different faith can freely practice a religion. If we are talking about, which in this instance it would be true, the West Bank, which is not Israel proper, as well as Gaza, which is not Israel proper, there has been a decline of Christians in those regions. But that's not due to Israel. If we look as to who's governing those territories, who's governing those areas, that's not Israel. So to then clump and say all of these numbers are shrinking, that's an absolute lie, which can be easily disputed. I don't know if you want to comment on that before I go into the next point that I thought was interesting.
No, just one quick one, Olga. It's the same thing, just like the whole apartheid state lie. There have been those who told that whole lie about the dwindling numbers of Christians in places like Bethlehem, knowing full well that the Bethlehem is under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, right? So having to call that out. But yes, ma'am, go ahead.
So, and thank you for making it even more specific. So we've got the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and then we've got Hamas, which is a known terrorist organization in Gaza. I also thought it was interesting when they, in their second point, say that if you really care, then where is your voice around the suffering of the Christians? Then I'm like, okay, where is the suffering of the Christians in the Middle East, more specifically Israel? You say, but where's your voice with regards to the persecution of our brothers and sisters on our very continent? I know that we have spoken about this as IPSI several times, and you alluded to it, Pastor Jimmy, with regards to the United Nations. But we have got problems on the African continent, Christians being slaughtered. Look at Nigeria by way of an example. Over 5,000 Christians killed just last year. The last time I checked the numbers, it was about 1,000, 2,000 in the first 100, 200 days of 2023. Where is their voice? So if you're saying that you're actually concerned about the plight of Christians, forget about just dwindling numbers because people don't want to be Christians anymore, but people being massacred. So do you care? Do you really not care? Like don't be a hypocrite in this regard. And so again, the information out there, they're being slaughtered. An interesting stat that I pulled up was that there are 14 Christians killed on average every day, which is the highest rate in the world. The highest in the world, not just the highest on the continent, not just the highest in the world. So if you're really concerned as a church about the well-being of Christians, where's your voice? Something else that I thought was interesting that they raised as a point was that Israel has occupied Gaza and continues to occupy Gaza. And I'm like, wait, if you know your history, and it was very public when this happened, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Like there's no occupation of Gaza. So what are we talking about here?
Olga, you remind me of I'm going to interject this real quick because I want to stay with the South Africa part because I'm going to do this other portion too, or the other party, the other gentleman who went to Israel. But to that one point, some of you who followed it on social media, you saw a couple of weeks ago, there were American accounts on Twitter. A video went viral of, the way I can describe it was ladies who were Christians who were attempting to use the word convert, share the gospel with, however you want to use that term, with Israeli Jewish boys in the old city, in this particular enclave here where there was this very Orthodox community was there. And the video went viral because the boys were kind of yelling at the ladies and they were, I guess somebody was hitting at them or whatever. It was like the middle of an altercation, right? And it went viral because people were talking about, oh, look at these Jews, look at how evil these Jews are, and there's the religion, the poor Christians in Israel, and that type of thing. And so I watched it for a while. I wasn't saying things. Finally, I'd had enough, right? And I was saying, basically, once I did a little bit of research, okay, here's the other story. They are doing this. It's actually in Israel, you can share the gospel, but not with people who are minors, if they're Jewish, because that I believe that's against their religious laws, right? What we think about those laws becomes irrelevant in that it is law there. And what was happening was very, very much an affront to that Jewish community there. And the thing that I was saying, Olga, for those who are just losing it about, oh, Israel is, first of all, there is religious and freedom, and that's why there's Christians in Israel and Jews and Muslims and everybody else. By the way, do you know what's going on with Christians over there in Syria? Do you know what's going on with Christians? Right. So for those people who are just like have the heart palpitations and like, oh, Christians. Okay. But if you were really concerned about Christians, you would not start with the nation of Israel where Christians can worship freely, right? Where Christianity is actually growing in number, right? You would actually deal with where it's actually going on. So Olga, what we see sometimes in the bias, what does it does reveal is an anti-Israel bias or even an anti-Semitism that's there. Like, oh, now I'm concerned because Jews are involved. Other than that, I'm not really concerned. So yes, to your point, Olga, we've seen that type of duality, which is really dangerous because it causes us to not speak out when there are injustices because we're waiting for the right thing to actually line up with the way we want them to line up. So yes, ma'am.
And then the people that are truly being persecuted suffer because attention is not being brought to light for them. And there's a smoke screen in relation to what's really going on. And so at the end of the day, what you think you're doing well in terms of bringing attention to the plight of people that are supposedly suffering, you're not. You're hurting those who really are. So an encouragement to anybody who will hear different voices speaking about these things is to unpack why they're saying what they're saying and to unpack it against history. And a beautiful juxtaposition of these two approaches is to have a look at what the interview of, or at least to listen to the interview of Mosiuoa Lekota by Bafana and hear why he says that Israel is not an apartheid state. He actually gives examples as to why it's not. Whereas the resolution that was taken by the Anglican Church just makes claims with broad strokes that if you unpack, you would actually be able to realize as false. What's what's both interesting as well as I'll use the word exciting for me, Pastor Dumisani, with regards to Kunene's interviews. So, by way of context, Mr. Kunene, he used to be a businessman. He is now the leader of a party called the Patriotic Alliance in South Africa, and it's also an opposition party in South Africa's political system. So, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 months ago, he, together with other members of his political party, undertook what they called a fact-finding mission to Israel. In South Africa, just a little bit of insight into our politics. We have got a representative government, which means that whether it's on a local level or even on a national level, people will vote for a party, and then based on the number of votes that they get, the percentage of those people will then come together to form a government. If you don't have the majority of the votes, then you will form a coalition. And so what's happened is that in many of our local governments, on a municipal level, we've got these coalition governments that aren't sticking, because they'll enter into agreements and relationships with each other, and then it'll fall apart, and then we have to go back to elections. And so they went on a fact-finding mission to Israel to say, Israel has got a electoral system that's similar to South Africa's, in that you need to form a coalition government. Israel, show us what has worked for you. Israel, show us what has not worked for you. And what was interesting is, so they then went to Israel, and Israel was a stop of several other places that they intend to visit. The vitriol, the attacks that he received in his personal capacity. Kunene has had a somewhat interesting past before when he was a businessman. For those that want to do some research on him, there was a season where he was called the Sushi King. I'll leave it at that. People can do their research as to that. And so in people being very unimpressed, more specifically the BDS, as well as various of their friends in South Africa, not only called out him as well as his political party in their effort to go to Israel, but attacked them personally. And he calls them out on this interview. He says, nobody has attacked us from an Israel side when we just put up our hands to say, we want to learn. And this is what I love about what's going on in many parts of the world, including the Middle East and including South Africa, is that people are putting their politics aside to say, we understand that there's this conflict, but we are concerned about what is good for our people. We want to invest, we want to learn so that our people can become better, whether it's for political stability, whether it's for food security, whether it's for agriculture, whether it's for counterterrorism, various things, economic prosperity, businesses, entrepreneurship. Enough now with the politics, we want to learn. And so he then calls out in an incredible interview, because the interviewer keeps attacking him and says, but Israel's had a government that's been unable to be stable for the last several years. And he's like, all right, you're talking about several years. I'm talking about since 1948. Then calls him out with regards to their lack of diversity. And he's like, I hear what you're saying, but what about these? What about the Arabs? What about the Druze? And he calls them out. And then finally he says, again, we have offered ourselves to learn from anybody who makes himself available to us. Not only have you not made yourselves available to us as pro-Palestinian people, you've attacked us, and attacked us on a personal level. So again, it goes to show that these people, at least from a South Africa perspective, and I would dare say many across the world, are not about pursuing the plight of the Palestinian people and encouraging others to do so. They're actually about hating the Jews and hating Israel. Because when people say, all right, I want to learn from them, they're like, no, you can't learn, and we're going to call you out and attack you on a personal level. So that was a fascinating interview, and it's a shift that, just by way of summarizing it up, that we're seeing, where it's like, all right, enough with your politics. We want to do what's best for our people, and I applaud that. And as a young African who still loves her continent, I pray that it is an approach that many more of our African leaders take, who recognize the gifts that Israel has to offer the world, and who say, all right, we see how you can help us. We are about investing in our people. We're about bringing our people up, and we want to engage with you.
Olga, you and you summarized it very well. Maria, if you can, I know there's not really a screen here, but it's actually YouTube link. So if you could just show, I mean, I don't know, if you can, that's fine. We're not going to do a clip from it. So what's the name of that radio station, or what that behind him, Olga? What is that again?
Salem. If I'm pronouncing it correctly, it is, yes, Salem Media. It is a Muslim-owned, Muslim-run radio, and I would even dare say that it's one of the mouthpieces of the BDS in South Africa.
Okay. So for those of you who can see the screen, that's just that's the actual host of them. I'm going to make a comment here, but host there in Event Wadi. He hosted the gentleman whom Olga was referring to. And what's the name of the political party again? It's the Patriotic Alliance.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the name of the party. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they, as Olga just explained, they went on a fact-finding mission, the Patriotic Alliance, to Israel to learn about their parliamentary system and how they kind of do what they do. And the host of the show really took him to task for doing that with the whole Israel apartheid trope and all those other types of things. And as Olga was just explaining, the gentleman saw closing the peace lab. Oh yes, I saw I saw these are the comments that are on there. I saw one about South Africa and the economy and everything. I'm going to try to get to those as well. Let's see, Pastor Hall just made a comment as well. So here, yes, and that piece, and thank you for saying that too. So Olga, along with what you just described, here's one of the things that was so interesting to me: the back and forth and everything, right? The pushback, right? He, like you just said, the gentleman says, "Hey, we're just trying to learn, grow, do, develop, and for our nation, right? We are trying to better ourselves as a political party. We're trying to strengthen South Africa, and you all are coming at us with, attacks and everything." And one of the things he mentioned was the Abraham Accords.
Mm-hmm.
He referenced the Abraham Accords as the Arab world making peace with Israel, and clearly his point, part of his point was that if Israel's staunch enemies who had been on the other side of that fence since 1948, including now even possibly Saudi Arabia, any moment we could be hearing about some sort of peace deal with Saudi Arabia and Israel, things that people thought would have never happened are actually happening. This Black South African political leader is saying Israel is making peace with its enemies, or I should say Israel's enemies are making peace with Israel, right? We are learning what we can from Israel, like any other nation, and we are not going to be intimidated by, we're not going to be castigated. You're not going to push us away from doing what we know is right. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the main reasons why that so resonates with me is, again, he's not talking about being a Zionist. He's not talking about Israel. He's not waving an Israeli flag and singing, Hatikva, none of that. He's practically saying, we are a community of nations where we can learn from others. We will do it, including Israel. And your demonization of Israel and the Jewish people is not going to stop us from working with them. And as to what Olga was saying, that was to me, one of the most powerful points, because it's not so much ideological, I'm a quote unquote Zionist. It is a practical, I'm concerned about my nation. And if Israel can help us do what we're doing, that's what I'm going to do. And it really did seem, Ola, like a shift is actually happening.
I would advocate so. There have been several cultural moments, even though like little steps that have happened in South Africa, and I would even say across the African continent in various parts over the last few years. An example is Lalela Nswane, who was Miss South Africa 2020, what is this, 2020, 2021. She just wanted to go to Israel and compete. Like, she had the dream to be a beauty queen, and BDS and the pro-Palestinian world came for her. And what they then exposed themselves at was literally Jew haters, because the ordinary South Africans were like, okay, but hold up, she just wants to compete in a beauty contest, and here you are coming for her, you're calling her absolute names. What has Israel done for you? She just wants to pursue her dream, leave her alone. I actually wrote an article, and I'm not sure if it's on Africa Israel, otherwise it's on the Times of Israel, but it's about how the pro-Palestinian side in South Africa, the BDS side, are bullies. They will bully you. They don't want to engage and get a different perspective. You just cannot hold a view that is contrary to theirs. Otherwise, they will bully you. They will tell you where you can't go. They will tell you what you cannot do. They will tell you who you can or can't be friends with. To be honest, it's reminiscent of apartheid South Africa, when they told Black people who you could speak to, right? It's like this finger waving at you and say, how dare you? And so when business people want to engage for the betterment of their businesses, when religious leaders want to learn and say, all right, what is the diversity of the freedom that's happening from a religious perspective in Israel, they want to learn. Well, culturally, I've already mentioned that. And now even from a political level, wanting to learn, they just expose themselves as being haters. But what's great is that the momentum, even though there's just like, it happens cyclically, but the momentum is growing. And it's exciting to see, because again, African leaders are now starting to put their people before the politics of it all. You mentioned Israel's enemies making peace, and one of the incredible peace partners, I would say, from an Abraham's Accords perspective, is also Sudan. Sudan, who, 1976 hosts a conference where the Arab League came together and they had the three no's. They said no to peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, and no negotiations with Israel. And that country now has signed up to the Abraham Accords. So a very, very exciting place to be as Israel's haters continue to expose themselves.
I put the link there on that, Maria, if you can. I'm not sure if you're able to do it. Olga's referring to the article that she wrote shortly after that. And I want to touch on this. I know we have a few minutes here left, but my heart went out to Miss South Africa, as so many did. And it's entitled "Miss South Africa's Voice Will Not Be Silenced." For those of you who would like to read the article that Olga was referring to, it is on our IPSI Substack. So you can go to ibsi.substack.com or go to ibsi.org. Scroll down to Africa Israel Weekly, and you can read that article as well. One of the many reasons why my heart went out to this young lady, because she actually did. There was a video that was placed on YouTube or somewhere on social media in which she was answering questions from people. She had come back to South Africa, like a mini press conference.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that broke my heart, Olga, was she talked about the death threats. Mm-hmm. She was ridiculed. They were called all kinds of names in these people's lives. Now, why? Why were they like? Because she decided to participate in the Miss Universe pageant, which that year was held either in Tel Aviv or I think it was Tel Aviv, right?
I think it was Eilat.
Eilat. Thank you, ma'am. And so they wanted her to boycott it. And she decided, no, I put all this work in. I'm going to go, right? And I'm going to represent South Africa in the Miss Universe pageant. I'm not weighing in on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the whole thing, right? She was demonized, vilified, and they threatened this young lady and her family, right? So now, when it comes to the issue of peace, it starts with conversation. Mm-hmm. I wrote in my book, Zionism in the Black Church, we talked about the whole issue of Anwar Sadat in the 1970s, and then who was the premier of Egypt, and the prime minister of Israel, which was Menachem Begin. They formed a peace treaty, which lasts to this day, right? I don't know that Egypt is going to be part of the Abraham Accords anytime soon, right? But the wars that had been, basically, Egypt was the seat of power when the state of Israel was reborn, when it claimed its independence. So the Arab wars, the Arab-Israeli wars, which were pretty much prompted by the Arab League, and it was Gamal Nasser who was the head of Egypt at the time. Those fights were coming out. The Soviet Union was involved. All these other nations were involved, right? But it was Nasser in Egypt that was the tip of that spear, if you will, right? So later on, Anwar Sadat, Menachem Begin, they began to talk of peace, right? And it was a shocking moment. I remember a little kid. I'm seeing Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States, and Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, and they're shaking hands and everything. And that was a shift in what was going on in the Middle East at that point. And why am I talking about that? Let me say this as a pastor from the scriptural point of view. Blessed are the peacemakers, the word of God says, for they shall be called the sons of God. Yes, we know that the ultimate peace in the world will be when Messiah comes. We recognize that, but the Bible doesn't allow us to sit there on our hands and not do what we can to bring some form of peace now. If we can bring some sort of cessation of violence and bloodshed and terrorism and people not being able to worship freely and all of those things. And again, as Olga and I are saying, a model for that would be Israel. The irony is that here are all of the Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and all these entities attacking Israel. But those of you who've been to Israel, you see these people of different ethnic groups in the Jewish state, different religions, living together, working together, right? That it is a model. Olga, it was interesting when I shared a couple of weeks ago the African-American imams that traveled to Israel. As part of another group. I don't want to mess up the name. I know that Elizabeth, she'd given that to me before as well. And we actually, you can go and check on other episodes a couple of weeks ago. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, everyone. And they were part of another group that went there. They visited the land. And one of the Black American imams said, Jerusalem, Israel, he said, is a model It's a model for people coming together. Here you have these Black American imams traveling to Israel for the purpose of peace. They are, again, and they were from Dallas, they were from Philly, they're from all over the country. And they're telling people, once again, like a Dr. King, I'm sure they've got other things going on in their cities that would occupy their time, right? And I'm sure, and they're very, very involved in their communities. But what they also had a global eye to say, we as Black American Muslims can help be a part of the peace process by wanting to bring peace, wanting to come to the land and then come back to our neighborhoods and our communities and share about what's going on. And Olga, by the way, one of them referenced the Abraham Accord. Here it goes again. He referenced the Abraham Accords and say, hey, here is peace. Ladies and gentlemen, the peace that Israel is brokering with its Arab neighbors is inspiring other nations to say, what can I do to bring peace? And if I can say it, while I have my South African daughter-in-law here, one of the most important elements of that in Africa will be South Africa. As South African leaders are doing exactly what Olga is describing now, this gentleman from the Patriotic Party, I'm saying Olga, yes?
Patriotic Alliance.
Patriotic Alliance going, or whether it's the former defense minister pushing back on the Israel apartheid, these men are doing it for love for their country, saying, look, I want my country strong. I can learn from Israel. I can commune with and fellowship with and sit down at the table with the Israeli brothers and sisters and bring some of these things back, right? Of course, the defense minister also mentioned about the water desalination. He said, hey, look, we're surrounded by water in Port Elizabeth. Send some young people up there, let them learn. Why? They're saying, let's come together. Ladies and gentlemen, peace becomes a hollow word if people don't have water, people don't have food, people don't have security, right? So they're recognizing that, hey, if we can bring a more stability and more prosperity to our people by gleaning from what Golda Meir set, together a long time ago as the foreign minister throughout Africa, then we want to do that. And I think this is an amazing time. Now, Olga, I know we're going to go in a moment. I've been juxtaposing that with the rising anti-Semitism in the West, right? We're talking about the peace that's growing in the East and throughout Africa where Israel is concerned. Not that Africa was ever at war with Israel. We're just talking about this strengthening of ties. But on our college campuses and in all this just the indoctrination and all of these things. Olga, I'm going to ask you a question. I know we got to go. As a South African, when you see what you're seeing, what is it your perspective? What is it that does that say to you? Because I've never had this part of the conversation. You know what's going on in the Middle East. You see what's going on in the United States, right? What is that? How do you read that?
I want to make sure that I understand your question, sir. So how do I read what specifically?
This piece, the Abraham Accords, the Arab nations in Israel, Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo just announced that it's going to open its embassy in Jerusalem. We're seeing this expand there. And in the West, in our colleges and our institutions, we're seeing this increase anti-Zionism. How does that, when you see that, what are you looking at?
Allow me to be totally blunt. So I applaud my continent. I applaud my continent for wanting to not only see the betterment of its people, but to thrive and to really step up to the plate in terms of leadership, be it political leadership, be it economic leadership, because it has the potential to be so much. Anybody that's heard me talk about Africa knows that I advocate for the fact that the Africa that we see today is not Africa's true identity. But now Africa is starting to stand up for itself, to want to own its own seat at the table. We have an article around BRICS and that whole movement that's there. And so when you see BRICS and the stand that they're, as African nations are starting to make, I mean, there are some players there that we need to talk about. That's not helpful. But we see them touching on the Abraham Accords. And so not only practically is there a renaissance, if I can say, with regards to African vibrancy and all that she has to offer, but also it's going to attract the blessings of the Lord. We know Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So just really for several decades, there's been a lot of focus on it's Africa's time, it's Africa's time, it's Africa's time. And so when I see what's going on here, I'm like, absolutely, it's Africa's time. And it's getting closer and it's exciting to watch. And then observing the West, my heart does break, and specifically it breaks for young people who are being put on a course where not only are they not going to attract the continued blessings of the Lord, I firmly believe that much of America's success has been as a result of its relationship and how it's honored and how it's treated Israel. And unfortunately, that's been on the decline from a political level and even on a social level. And unfortunately, the opposites of blessings, which is cursing, is going to come to fruition there. And then also just teens being able to be safe on their own college campuses. No kid, irrespective of where you come from and what your identity is, should worry about going to school, wanting to get an education, and freak out about, am I going to be attacked? Can I really just study for the sake of studying? And so whereas America used to be a place that many would flock to in order to get a great education and have a wonderful college experience, I think unfortunately we're going to start to see the opposite of that, because with the rise of anti-Semitism and the eye of that anti-Semitism being on college campuses, that's not going to be attractive for people in nations of the world. Who wants to send their kid and they don't know what attacks are going to happen because of the hatred towards Jewish people and how that's going to affect their own children, be they Jewish or non-Jewish? So my heart does go to the West, and more specifically to America. I mean, America is my home. I married an American man, and I have two beautiful American babies. And it's Africa's time. It really is Africa's time.
There's so much we can unpack still, and we are out of time now. I see some of the questions that are there, Olga, and I've been just kind of glancing to the side there of everything from the growing Russian influence, which we actually has. I'm not sure who the person there was. We actually unpacked some of that a couple of weeks ago as well, but we will address it again. But I want to encourage all of you here at the forum. We're here every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern for about an hour, and we're a little over an hour here. But please go. If you go on our YouTube page, you will see, and you go to the page, you click on live, you'll see all of the episodes, at least for the past several months from this. We try to put those titles on there. So we talked about BRICS, we talked about Russia, and so we will unpack it some more because these things are very much developing very, very quickly. Shout out to Miss Judith out there in Toronto. I believe Olga, I didn't realize it, but apparently we're scheduled to be in Toronto, April 2024. I think that's something that Josh is working on. So Judith, yes, ma'am, we're looking forward to being with you. I have never been to Canada yet. Everybody believe that? I've never been there. I'm so looking forward to going. Have friends out there that we've known for a little while. So looking forward to spending some time with them. And so there's other questions that are there as well, which we'll unpack about Nigeria. Also about, there was one other one that really caught my eye. South Africa's economy. Olga, she has spoken about that as well. What's going on? So we will unpack some of that even more here going forward, maybe even on next week. But as we get ready to cue the music, Maria, we're gonna have to leave here in a moment because we are out of time. But we're looking forward to it. Now, those of you who are on Clubhouse, I want to apologize to you again. My mic was muted. I will get it together, right? My staff is helping me. And even Miss Elizabeth, shout out to you, Miss Elizabeth, for helping me. I saw it pop up. She was trying to flag me down, right? She's going, your mic's, no, your mic's. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. Appreciate you helping me out. So everyone, thank you. This is the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, our forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. I'm Dumisani Washington, founder in Washington, who's both a board member and the leader of our Speakers Bureau and the COO of Club Z, who will be headed to Israel very soon over the next few days to receive her award for being the top visionary awarded by Jewish National Fund. So Israeli, she'll be there. She won't be there for many, many days. We're going to try to do something where she can connect and do some other things there, but it's going to be a whirlwind trip. But thank you, everyone, for coming. Olga, thanks for joining tonight and helping your father-in-law out, ma'am.
Always a pleasure, sir.
You go to ibsi.org. We're also a nonprofit organization. Click on donate. We're a nonprofit. All gifts are tax deductible. We are only able to do what we do because of the generous donations of our donors. This generation of donors as well. Yes, and we thank you all so much for it. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.